So it feels like only a few years ago that plant-based meats hit the mainstream, with Beyond Meat and Impossible being the leaders, and people were really excited about these products. They were excited about the ethical benefits, the environmental benefits, and even the potential health benefits. But recently I've heard a lot of criticism of these products, the biggest one being that they are
ultra-processed,
highly synthetic, processed.
exactly, that they are ultra-processed. And so the common thought is that, well, processed food is bad, so ultra-processed food, well, that's ultra bad. But you might be someone who's thinking, well, I'm interested in switching to more plant-based meats, but are they actually any good for you? After all, most people care about their health and they want to make sure that they're not swapping in anything harmful into their diet. Like, that makes perfect sense. And I'm sure we've all seen that meme floating around that basically makes a side-by-side comparison of the ingredient list of one of the plant-based burgers and a beef burger. And the whole point is to make the plant-based meat look really chemically and scary, with its long list of unfamiliar ingredients. And I don't know about you, but I don't think that by itself is a good way to judge how good a food is for you. I mean, after all, everything is made of chemicals. I mean, look, here's the ingredient list of a strawberry. And despite all the scary ingredient names, we know that strawberries and fruits are good for you. Unless you've been listening to Dr. Berg, I guess. Or here's the ingredient list of beef. It can also be broken down into a list of unfamiliar names. So yeah, judging a food by its ingredient list doesn't seem to be the best tool that we have to determine how good a food is for us. In general, seeing actual results of what these foods do to us is going to be the best way to determine if a food is health promoting for us or not. And luckily, today we have a lot of smart people who have done the research looking into the effects of plant-based meat versus animal meat on our health. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the research and we're going to see if we can make a call if ultra-processed vegan meat really is that bad for you. Okay, so I know I said we were going to look into the research, and we will in a second, but maybe a good place to start would be comparing the nutritional profile side by side of a traditional beef burger with Beyond Meat and Impossible Meat, which is exactly what health professional Dr. Michael Gregor has already done for us. I'll link his full video below, but here's a quick summary. So he starts by just looking at what you could consider to be the unhealthy components of the burgers. So that would be trans fat, cholesterol, saturated fat, and sodium. And one thing he points out is the trans fat content of the burgers, which we should care about because trans fat poses a serious risk to cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes. So much so that the Institute of Medicine has said anything above 0 grams is harmful, so they don't recommend you having any. So it's great that the plant-based foods don't have any trans fat, but you'll notice in terms of saturated fat, they're about the same, and you'll notice that the plant products are straight up worse when it comes to sodium. And so something that Dr. Gregor doesn't cover specifically in this video is the difference in cholesterol. But we should probably keep that in mind because you know that dietary cholesterol, at least to some extent, is associated with an increase in LDL, which is the bad cholesterol. And we know that lowering LDL reduces your chance of a heart attack. But anyways, let's go back to an updated version of the side-by-side comparison. I've added the protein and the calories myself because everyone cares about that, and they're about equal. Anyways, the final thing I'll touch on is that Impossible and Beyond have some fiber, which is nice, while the beef doesn't have any. And we do know that people are definitely not getting the dietary fiber that they need. But I don't know, maybe looking at the side-by-side comparisons is too reductive of an approach. After all, who cares what something could theoretically do to you if we have more concrete evidence of what it actually does to you? Like maybe there's other stuff in the animal meat or the plant-based meat that have different impacts on our bodies. So the real question is, what evidence do we have on the impacts of plant-based meats on our bodies when we eat that instead of animal meat? And luckily for us, I found a meta-analysis that looks at just that. So this meta-analysis looks at 43 studies on plant-based alternatives, and the title is a bit of a giveaway, but so yeah, let's read through the whole thing. Ha, no, I'm kidding. But I did read through their findings, and there's some great stuff in there. And honestly, I recommend looking through it yourself, but I'm gonna go over some of the best stuff in there. Also interesting to note that they do touch on the environment, which I'm also gonna talk about later on. And right off the bat, this meta-analysis uses the term PBAPA, which stands for plant-based animal which stands for plant-based animal product alternative. But I'm just gonna be saying plant-based meats, So anyways, right at the start of this meta-analysis, it says that the plant-based meats present a number of benefits in terms of nutrition, weight loss, muscle synthesis, and even specific health conditions. Okay, cool, so let's see why it's saying that. So early on in the health section, it mentions how red and processed meats are classified as carcinogenic by the World Health Organization. Specifically, red meat is a group 2A carcinogen, which the WHO defines as this will probably give you cancer. And processed meat is a group 1 carcinogen, which they define as this will definitely give you cancer. Okay, so that might not be exactly what's on the website, but you get the gist. And maybe that can partly explain why one study ran an analysis that indicated that more premature deaths are avoided at higher levels of plant-based meat intakes. And they estimated that integrating plant-based meats into diets could prevent around 50,000 deaths a year, attributing 85% of those deaths to diet-related health risks like heart disease cancer, and stroke. But like being alive, okay, big deal, 8 billion people do it every day. Let's get into something that people really care about: how good you look naked. In terms of muscle building, there were 2 studies that compared animal meat and plant-based meats. By the way, I'm gonna be saying mycoprotein, which is a protein that is made from a fungi. So add that to the vocabulary for this video too. So anyways, in one of the 2 studies, the authors highlight that gram for gram, mycoprotein and milk protein are equivalent in their amino acid bioavailability. And in the other study, the authors concluded that plant-based meats are likely to be as effective as animal proteins for stimulating muscle synthesis. So that's useful for people thinking about the gains, man. But now that you've got the gains, what about the cut? What about trying to get those abs? Or what about that sculpted ass though? Well, they included 2 studies that showed benefits for weight loss when replacing traditional meat with plant-based meats. In one study, where participants did 8 weeks consuming animal meat and 8 weeks consuming plant-based meats, they found that when subjects were eating plant-based meats, they lost a few pounds, despite eating the same amount of calories that they were eating when they were consuming the animal-based meats. In another study, they found that when subjects ate mycoprotein instead of chicken, they chose to eat significantly less calories. Sublime. It even includes some studies suggesting that plant-based meats can be beneficial for gut health and diabetes, which, I don't know, is pretty unexpected. I mean, you'd expect that when they're talking about consuming whole foods like beans and whole grains, but not the plant-based meats. But it looks like even they offer some benefits over conventional animal meat. But yeah, according to the meta-analysis, 2 studies regarding insulin responses provide evidence that plant-based meats could be beneficial for those with diabetes. And in one study, they compared stool samples of people who replaced some meats with plant-based meats and concluded that occasional replacement of animal meat with plant-based meats promote healthy gut microbiomes. And finally, they also include in the meta-analysis recommendations to further improve the nutritional profiles of the plant-based meats. They recommend increasing the B12 content, the iron content, the protein content, while lowering the salt content. And I don't know, I think that's a pretty interesting takeaway. The fact that plant-based meats have runway to improve in a way that animal meats don't. Anyways, I did want to go over one of the studies specifically because it's one that I was already somewhat familiar with. So Beyond Meat wanted to see how their products fared against traditional animal meat. So they funded a study through Stanford. The study was a randomized crossover trial where they had participants eat 2 servings a day of plant-based meats versus animal meats for 8 weeks each, while keeping everything else as similar as possible. And they used a range of different products, so if they had ground beef, they also used Beyond ground beef. If they gave them chicken, then they also gave them plant-based chicken. And the animal products were organic and grass-fed, so it didn't look like they were trying to intentionally tank the quality of the animal products. So I actually already brought up one of the findings earlier, that people actually lost weight while eating the plant-based products. But another finding was that while eating the plant-based products, people lowered their LDL cholesterol. And the ultimate takeaway from the study was that plant products improved several cardiovascular disease risk factors, and there was no adverse effects on risk factors from the plant products. Which I actually found surprising, given that a big point of criticism for plant-based products is their high sodium content. So you would think that you would see that in the blood pressure or something, but nope, they didn't find any significant difference there. So from a health perspective, the evidence seems to suggest that plant-based alternatives, despite their label as ultra-processed, are not just on par with animal products, but they are actually better for us. And like I was mentioning earlier, another criticism that I hear about these products anecdotally is that they lack iron or they lack B12. But we know that you can get iron from a ton of other sources like beans, whole grains, dark leafy greens, and B12 you can get from fortified plant milks or other fortified foods. But you should probably supplement just in case. I think it's a small price to pay for reducing your risk of heart disease and cancer. Do keep in mind though, many of these plant-based meats are still full of saturated fats and they're made from oils. So even if by comparison to animal products they look good, I would not really consider them pillars of health. So it goes without saying that if you really want to see the benefits of eating a plant-based diet, the key is getting most of your calories from whole plant foods like beans and chickpeas and seeds and oats and nuts and veggies and fruits. Remember, plant food doesn't just mean vegetables. It means all the foods from the plant kingdom and fungi. And the best part too is that whole plant foods like beans are going to be more affordable than plant-based meat and animal meat. So now that we know that swapping in plant-based meats for animal meats will probably leave you healthier overall, I think it's important to touch on another big reason that people want to include more plant-based meats into their diets, and that's for the climate. And a lot of people might be thinking, well, how big of a difference is it? Like, is it a bit better? Is it a lot better? And so from the Beyond Meat website, you'll find these statistics about Beyond Burgers saying stuff like 99% less water use, 93% less land. Pretty stark differences, honestly. But I actually prefer this graph because it's much easier to visualize the massive difference between the 2 products, especially the water use. Like, damn, that's just astounding. And that's clearly not even to scale. And this really shouldn't come as a surprise because we know that animals, cows in particular, take an exorbitant amount of resources to reach slaughter weight, before we can eat them. And most of the time they're eating plants that we could eat ourselves. And we have a ton of other research out there that quantifies this. From this study, if we all stopped eating animal products tomorrow, we would only need a quarter of the farmland we currently use to feed everyone. And even though plant-based meat alternatives are not on this graph, we can see the huge differences of impact in growing animal proteins, even fish and chicken, versus plant proteins like beans and tofu. And I want to take a second to point out that even the greener alternatives like fish and chicken still have much larger impacts than something like beans and tofu. And that's hidden by just how horrible beef is. But even chicken is 5 times worse by these metrics than beans, for example. And I'm pretty sure in other contexts we would consider something being 5 times worse extremely bad. So something to think about. And so purely from the environmental angle, that's why a lot of people talk about the need to switch to a plant-based diet for a sustainable future. And it doesn't have to be this ultra-processed vegan meat. It can be the basics like beans or a bean burger instead. But in any case, if you haven't given the plant-based meats a try, do it. I'd say about half of my friends who have tried them have told me that they can't even tell the difference between those products and the ones that they're used to. And they just keep getting better and more affordable. So there you have it. When it comes to eating the ultra-processed plant-based meat, the research seems to suggest that eating it still leads to better health outcomes for you, for the planet, and of course, the animals. So thank you so much for watching, and a huge shout out to my patrons who help make these videos possible. I'll see y'all in the next one.